Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name's Ian Bennett and I'm Iain the Tech Bear. A little bit of a different video today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my music project Polyatomic. I started Polyatomic in 2003. I needed a bit of a keep myself busy project and something to be creative as I was switching careers. I had lost my job with a well-known Canadian company that was in the telecom space that kind of imploded financially, and I was looking to completely change careers at that time. So out of that particular project, I've released 4 albums, 2 singles, and I've got a 5th album. Well, really technically it's 4 full albums and an EP, and I'm releasing my 5th album, Strength, sometime next year or in 2026. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm taking my time with that particular album. Today I'm going to go through a track called Strength, which is the title track from the album, and it's actually the last track. Strength is the successor to Icebergs. It is meant to be a follow-on. However, it is an album that I'm not getting into the weeds on. So what's interesting is out of the Iceberg sessions, I've been able to start writing music quicker. I've been able to get it right quicker and also get the right sounds much quicker. And it is a considerably more upbeat album, and I purposely wanted it to be upbeat. Icebergs is my 3rd album, and it was an incredibly difficult album to write. Most of it was written while traveling in the UK, and also some of it written during lockdown during the pandemic. If Icebergs was really about kind of processing things, then Strength is about the strength that you get from processing and how much better life is when you process different aspects of your lives through music. So many artists will use music as a way of expressing their frustrations, expressing emotion and stuff. As I said, this album is a lot more upbeat, and the music is a little bit faster, and I'm probably using more major chords, or I'm switching between major and minor. There was an interesting video, I believe it's from The Charismatic Voice. So she has this video about Depeche Mode's Enjoy the Silence, and she noticed that there's, I believe it was Enjoy the Silence, where she says, wow, they're using minor chords and then major chords in different ways. So in an attempt to make this album a little bit more upbeat and such, I'm trying to use more major chords rather than the minor chords. But I do switch between both, and it kind of represents the duality of life and what we sometimes deal with. So we have our positive moments, we have our negative moments, or not so positive moments, and that's all part of life. Let's talk a little bit about Strength, the album. For Strength, I have this particular picture I took while traveling with friends in the north of England. Of course, we had stopped in somewhere, and I decided I'd take this picture of this ice cream that I had, which was amazing. It was amazing. I don't remember where we actually picked it up, but the image of sort of cars on this road or in the parking lot, the gray skies and the deep green, because at that time it was spring, just seemed to work together. And it works together for the concept for this particular album. Strength consists currently of 5 tracks. So we've got a track called Let's Do This, which is very fast and for the most part upbeat. That whole minor major shift, I do that all the time in that particular track. It's pretty incredible. There's a track called Connecting Dots, which a friend of mine, Mark, has remastered, and it sounds incredible. Gaia is the next track. Gaia was produced in Michigan with my friend Junior, and it is a very trance-like track. Again, another incredible moment. Second last track is a track called Freedom, also titled Endgame. It is almost like it could be closing credits to a video game. It sounds pretty incredible. And then, of course, there's strength. Strength is kind of synthwave inspired, and it is meant to be uplifting. So let's get into the actual track. So this is Strength. So it has 19 tracks, of which 5 are drums, 6 are essentially bass lines, some mids and highs. So this is pretty standard for me. Lots of repeated same types of patterns. And someone actually said to me early on in my sort of development of Polyatomic was essentially spend time creating individual building blocks. Now, I tend to do that on a per track basis rather than just generally, making little sequences and things like that. But you will see that, this BT Flex Butter, whatever that is, if I were to zoom out, it's the same notes as used here, just, different, in certain cases, different octaves, etc. So, by the way, I've been a long time Logic user before Apple actually bought Logic itself. So I know the application fairly well. I don't use everything in it. Let's talk a little bit about the instruments I'm using. So I'm doing, actually all of this is soft synths other than the beats, which are Apple loops. So I do tend to use a lot of Apple loops in my beats. And I'm known for the syncopation, so essentially using different kind of beats that hit differently and different kinds of beats that may not actually go together. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about the instruments. So I'm using Yuhi Diva. Diva again. Serum. So Diva and Serum are very much used in EDM productions. Serum again. Lots of Serum. Korg M1. The Korg M1 is iconic, and I am using the Piano 8 plugin. I had access, but never used actually a Korg M1 in my high school. My music teacher, Brian Jones, actually had one. And I didn't realize until much later just how iconic the sounds are on the M1. The organs, the pianos, used in all kinds of productions. Black Box, Pet Shop Boys, I can hear that Korg M1 piano anywhere, and same with the organ. So M1 again, is this a layered piano? It is. So I do a lot of layering as well. So I've been a complete user from Native Instruments for a long time. So again, layering more pianos. This track is definitely heavily piano based and more complete control with the Piano V3. Okay, back to Diva again, Serum, the Korg, and Largo, so from Waldorf as well. So if I bring up the keyboard, yeah, lots of sort of pads and sort of atmosphere to that. And then my beats, again, lots of Apple loops here. One of the things that I've been trying to do with this particular album is, I know Terminal had heavy bass on it and heavy kick drums. I'm trying to scale that back so that the rest of the music has sort of room to breathe. And if I look at the different beats that I'm using, so let's start with the dive kick, which kicks in at about 20 seconds in, bar 11. So not heavy, very sort of muted, if you will. And then the brick kick. Which you wouldn't know that it was just more than the hi-hat there, right? There's sort of some depth that gets added. So when you listen to that by itself, and then there's a little bit more that gets added to it. And then the cosmic harmony kick, which sounds like that, which adds even more depth to the beats. And then this Frankie FX drum gives that really cool fill. I can't remember. Oh, you know what? The F9 Frankie FX drums comes from James Wiltshire of the Freemasons. And I learned about him just before the pandemic. He did a remix of Alanis Morissette's Smiling, which is just out of this world. And he sells sample packs and sound packs and such that you can use. So what that does... Oh, and then let's actually look at what I did here. So the Hush Tones tom fill. So that gives a really nice break, and let's listen to the beats together. So that adds some tension to our mix, and some ambiance as well. White noise in the background is so important to EDM and music ambience. Now, I didn't really start with the beats on this particular track. I actually started with, I think it was just playing around a little bit with sort of one of the piano lines. Let's have a look. Oh, that's a pad. Yeah, so there we go. Let's actually layer in some of the piano lines. So what I've got is I've got the M1. I think I used, well, I most definitely used an arpeggiator. And then what I did was I got the chords that I wanted to use. And, you know, one approach you can use is instead of playing chords, you can actually play your chord as an arpeggiated chord. So I use Replica for delays and diffusion, and it is a wonderful, wonderful plugin. I can't talk about that enough. The other plugin I use is Valhalla. So I happen to be using Valhalla Supermassive on some of the other parts of the track, but let's focus on the piano lines here. So the blue is pretty much all piano. So I've got the high bit here and the lower, actually no, this is the higher bit, this is the lower. And of course the piano V3, which actually isn't from Native Instruments, it's actually Arturia's piano V3. And of course the M1. The M1 being so very high pianos, the lower pianos. Different piano plugins sound differently. And with that even higher piano, I'm using a dotted delay. Okay, so the pianos are in blue. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the pads and some of the other sounds. So I've got this whole sort of synth wavy bit right here. Replica XT to widen the sound on that. Let's see what else is in this section. So some atmospheric stuff, and definitely a hallmark of trance music is a nice long reverb. So you're hearing that from both the Solar Ping and Korg M1 film score. So these individually sound like... That sounds very Dreamcast to me. That film score is amazing. And then some very ethereal type sounds that do really cool things and move. So that's from Largo. Combine it. Which is the end part. So I like putting my pads together that are maybe a little bit different, that don't fit in necessarily to the rest of the track. I've got the pianos. Let's have a look at the top part here. So sort of a very sort of synth lead that's been arpeggiated. So I'm using the arpeggiator here and a little bit of randomness, variation 3 and going up octave. So I love using arpeggiators and having it automate. I wouldn't want to program this myself. So if I'm just playing this, let's see, let's bring this up. Gotta select the track. That's very high. Very synth popish. And of course I've got some automations here. So actually I'm gonna move this over here. Actually maybe here. So to add a little bit of bass and depth, I've got this Deep Space Diva that, well actually, let's see, it's Hail Bob? Yeah, Hail Bob. Sometimes my sections, I don't rename them because I just copy them and then change the, transpose the notes up or down and stuff like that. So, okay, and then let's see, BA the Realist. Serum, yeah. So, Serum, we had on that driving bass. And then a good pad, which is slightly different to the rest to build a difference in the chord. Sorry, chord. So in one I go up, the other I go down. And then later in the track I have this trancey bass, and I've got this, what is this? So on Diva, filter contours. All right, so let's move this over. I can't remember. This sounds like a fake trumpet. And one of the things I love about my bass lines is I like them to be bouncy. So if I combine, let's see, not that, but the realist, the pads pluck, and these. It breaks the groove up a little bit. And it sounds a little bit weird at this point because we haven't got everything together and, you know, the beats, but not quite what we're looking for. Actually, that would be great. All right. Let's combine all this together. So. So you can hear all those elements and how they combine together. So let's play this part, adding bit by bit. So we'll start with the top. And you can see how someone could create a cool mix. And that weird trumpet area, you might not hear it, but it does add to the track. And you can hear that white noise that's in the background as well. It makes such a difference. So, if I recall correctly, I started with the piano line, I believe. And just playing with chords and then what they would sound like when arpeggiated. And then I'm layering the pads and the strings and what I'm thinking would complement that. Except I'm doing it probably more with like a string or an actual pad itself. And then I'm just layering sounds, so I'm throwing different sounds at it to across the range, the sonic range, the frequency range of sound, and making sure that things complement each other and just make things sound interesting. that's also why you build up. So I actually start this track not with the beats. It's actually a little bit different for me because sometimes I just want to come out of the gate with the beats and bass and such, and I'm not. Okay, I lied. That's pretty bass. And it's kind of got a beat to it. Or a groove. I love how that beat comes in. And that little surprise of the Frankie's FX drum. Oops, I muted something out. And then the break, create a little bit of tension, a little bit of quietness. Drop. Repeat the main theme. Start bringing it to a close. Here, this is still going because of that reverb. Very long delay on that. And I decide to have that as the close, despite the fact that other sounds have muted. And it creates a nice ending, and that's the end of the album. So there you go. I've got some extra little bits that happen to be at the end here. Let's have a quick look and see what didn't make it. Or maybe it did. Let's see. Nice. Yeah, I didn't want to go down that melancholy path that, to me, this section does. But it does have an interesting chord progression. That could make it into an extended mix if I really wanted to. I do feel this track should be a little bit longer, but I'm quite happy with where it is for the album version. Aha. So this was kind of where I started with the sort of piano chords that I wanted, etc. So didn't make it in, but let's have a quick listen to how the pianos actually did turn out again. So you can hear some of the themes that certainly made it from here. And again, all that effort to make it sound interesting, so it's not that repetitive, yet it is a repetitive trance synthwave track. And you know what? I am going to play this one more time in its entirety without any comment. And you can see I have a fair bit of volume adjustments that I make within the automations of the track. So not a lot on the beats, but certainly to get that trance element and that sort of, well, less synthwave, but definitely the trance elements. Let's talk a little bit again. So I'm using Chan EQ, so equalizers to manage some of the bass, especially on that first little bit. Some compressors, Diva Serum ARP, Valhalla, replica. So these are pretty standard. Oh, Valhalla Room. So Valhalla Room is what gives us that long decay using large chamber. Again, Valhalla Room is epic. And again, used very much in trance and EDM productions. And then let's have a look on what I've got on bus one is I've got Valhalla Room, and then my mastering chain. So I'm using Ozone 10. I'm using the AI assistant to master the track, and then I embellish on the settings that it gives me. So it does a great job of imaging the sounds and making sure I can hear each aspect of the production. And then I sometimes adjust the dynamic EQ, the imager, and add a few more effects to the mastering chain. And then Chan EQ just to help with sort of sub frequencies that nobody would hear unless you're in a club, and then you're killing the sound system. So there you go. That is Strength, the final track from the upcoming album, Strength. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.